The Honourable Member Grant Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It would be fair to say that I stand in the third reading debate as a reluctant supporter of this bill. Not because I in any way want to be seen to be endorsing the production of methamphetamine in New Zealand and in any sense countenancing or accepting the great harm that's caused by P in our community and totally accepting the need for, as a parliament, us to work together on the scourge that is P, and then making sure that we minimise harm, as my colleague Ian Lees-Galloway has said, across the spectrum of drug abuse. Those things we take on board. But my concern is that as we look through the provisions in this bill, as somebody who wasn't on the Select Committee when the bill was being dealt with for the most part, I ask myself, is this the best use of Parliament's time when it comes to dealing with questions around the Misuse of Drugs Act? And I think that we need to make sure that when we are making changes like this, that it is one that it's a change that is long-lasting, it's durable, it actually modernises law when we should modernise law. The Minister's taken the decision to do a stopgap style approach. And at one level we can support that, and that is why Labor is supporting the bill, because we do recognise there is a need to do something here. But at another level, the fact that the government has dragged its heels, that we have a Law Commission report that provides the basis for a full rewrite of the misuse of drugs available to us, and yet we are not making progress on that, is intensely frustrating, Mr Speaker. I want to speak about three sections of the bill. The first of those is the reclassification of ephedrine and pseudoephedrine. And again, we know the precursors to methamphetamine are ephedrine and pseudoephedrine. We realise on this side of the House the importance of being able to deal with the supply of those. But as my colleague Ian Lees-Galloway has said, 90% probably, maybe 80%, with a big stretch 70% of that precursor product is imported into this country. It's not been bought across the shelves of pharmacies. That is the truth. And as somebody, I might say, who is unable to use the product phenylephrine, I find myself struggling to find a cold remedy available to me, and suffering from one as I am today and have been for the last week. Pseudoephedrine products are important for people, and I acknowledge they'll still be available via prescription. But the question that we have to ask ourselves when we make law like this is this the best position we can come to? And I know in the Select Committee that the Pharmaceutical Society stated that in fact the alternatives to pseudoephedrine weren't as effective. And they leave many people needing to visit a general practitioner for a prescription for symptomatic relief. And that exposes them and others to further infection and imposes an unwelcome increase in workload for general practices. So the truth is that the expert evidence, and indeed from some experts who are within this House, is that in fact pseudoephedrine and products tend to be those that have the most effective result. There are alternatives to moving to a prescription-based approach for pseudoephedrine and ephedrine products, including what has been trialled in some parts of the countries where there are pharmacy systems to detect and report inappropriate purchase. Those models could be tried. And it is reluctantly that I say, yes, we must do something about this. We don't want to stand in the way of that. There are elements of this bill that are good. But I do look at this and say, is this the end result? And I have a feeling when we return to these matters as part of an overall review of the Misuse of Drugs Act, we might find that things change. Mr Speaker, I want to speak briefly about the SOP that the Minister brought in around the creation of these temporary class drug notices. That is obviously the stopgap measure that the Minister has come to try and do something about the products such as chronic and others that we've had a lot of publicity about in recent times. I spoke in the committee stages of the debate about the fact that I am concerned that there will be loopholes in this legislation that mean that despite the best efforts of the Minister, products with slightly different chemical makeups will appear on the market the Minister will clamp down upon them via his Gazette notice, 7 days, and then it's off the shelves, and then lo and behold another product appears with a slightly different chemical makeup, and then the whole process has to be repeated over and over again. And so I don't foresee that this will remove these products from the market, but as Ian Lees-Galloway has said, it will limit them. It will prevent them from being available in as many places, from being as visible, and so therefore some good is done. But I do believe that the loopholes will be such that there may not actually be the amount of restriction of supply that the Minister would like to see. Overall, what this highlights, though, is the desperate need to change the onus of proof about a product, a synthetic cannabinoid product, so that before it enters the market in New Zealand, it is properly tested and assessed. It is, in my view, ridiculous that we have a situation where products such as this, psychoactive product substances such as this, can enter the New Zealand market without any kind of testing. And the onus of proof must be turned onto the producers of these products so that we do not continue to repeat the situation. So, Mr. Chair, Mr. Speaker, and when it comes to the temporary class drug notices, I join with my colleagues in supporting the fact that a stopgap measure is available, but I am concerned that there are loopholes. The possibility of stockpiling continues to exist, and as my colleague, again, Ian Lees-Galloway said, let's be honest about this provision. Let's be honest about the fact that it's not going to rid the country of synthetic cannabinoids. What it is going to do is limit the way in which they're sold and perhaps the amount of them that's available, and we support it because that is a good thing, but it is most certainly not the end of the story. Mr. Speaker, the other matter that I particularly want to address is the question of the long-term future of drug law in New Zealand. And I do believe that it is the responsibility of this House to consider today and as soon as possible how we can come up with a whole new piece of legislation around the question of the Misuse of Drugs Act. As other speakers have said during other stages of this debate, the Misuse of Drugs Act is from another time. It is from a time when there were different drugs available. The availability of drugs in total was completely different. And the Law Commission recognised that in its report tabled in this House on the 3rd of May. That report has got 144 recommendations in it. It actually includes making the possession of drug utensils legal, which is an interesting point given what we're going to be doing in this bill today. So should we come to the situation where we decide to implement the Law Commission's report, we may well be undoing elements of what we are doing today. But the report also calls for a more lenient approach to social dealers and those caught with small amounts of illegal drugs for personal use. Because the Law Commission President Justice Grant Hammond said the law needs to continue to impose heavy penalties on those who have profited from the manufacture and sale of illicit drugs, but it also needs a more holistic focus on individual drug offending. To simplify that down, Mr. Speaker, the criminal element around drugs is in the supply. We need to do a harm minimisation approach when it comes to use and personal use. And we need to ensure that we address the real crime of drugs rather than creating crimes and an unnecessary focus on some of those individual personal use. This is not just me, Mr. Speaker, this is the Law Commission. And I think it's vitally important today as we pass what everyone in this House is acknowledging is a stopgap measure, that we acknowledge that there is a need for a fundamental reform of drug law in New Zealand. The Law Commission has given us the blueprint for that. I am disappointed that the government is not moving forward more quickly on that. But on this side of the House, we know that we need to take a responsible approach and send a signal to the community that the purveyors of synthetic cannabinoids need to know their products represent a risk and they will not enter this market without being watched and closely monitored and removed where possible. But that I do call upon the House to ensure that when we can, as with all speed possible, return to this House with a bill that properly addresses the misuse of drugs and creates a modern law rather than this kind of stopgap measure.
I call the